We had gotten here. We first went to a ride. That evening, all the Nisikim came up. My father was childhood friends of Abba Gadol.
Oh.
Nasi Gavri, his name is Nasi Gavriel at that time.
Right.
And they came up with others. Right. So, and they remember me. So I was in the back, and sometimes my father would come back for certain things, but I heard my name called, David. So I came out of one door, and he came out the other door, and they said, we're talking to Abba. And I went back, and then he went back, and they called again, David. And I came out, and then he came out, and that's when my Abba, Nasi Gabriel, said, okay, this is going to be a situation. He said, your name is David, your father's name is David. We'll call you Ben David.
Uh-huh.
So that's where that Ben David came from.
Okay, so that's where the name came from,
Right.
Ben David. Okay.
Right, but my name is David.
David, right.
And when my father made transition just a few years ago, took
your
my name back.
Okay.
David.
Okay.
That's going to be a challenge for most people that
That
know
have known
me,
you
right?
all your life.
You know,
Is,
Ben David,
yeah.
Ben David, but
Okay.
David.
Shalom, shalom, and welcome to another episode of Living Chronicles. So today we have here with us Dr.
David Israel.
David Israel. Welcome to Living Chronicles.
Torah.
We're not showing y'all the bloopers.
Right.
So I always start with reading a little of the person's bio. So Dr. David, his name means beloved. He came here in 1976 at the age of 17 from Chicago. He has 3 children and 15 grandchildren.
Really?
You don't look old enough to have 15 grandchildren. So, reading from his bio, he's a 1983 graduate of the School of the Prophets Institute of Higher Learning at Jerusalem. He holds degrees in New World Chronicles / history, education, and hermeneutic philosophy. He's understudy and steward to the headmaster and dean of the School of the Prophets, Prince Dr. Shliach ben Yehuda, in 1979. In 1982, Dr. Israel became a member of the prestigious elite order of the spiritual investigators. In 2003, he received his PhD in hermeneutic philosophy from the School of the Prophets. Dr. David is highly recognized in the field of English and Hebrew language learning. He's worked with the Ministry of Education of Israel and various institutes of higher learning, including UNO Academic College, the Israel College of Business Management, the Mandel College of Leadership, Manchester University Israeli Extension, and the Israel College. He is also the creator of Focus, Foundational Organization of the Constructs of Universal Study, which is a new approach to language teaching. Established in 2006 in Herzliya, Israel, relocated to Dimona in 2007. The purpose and mission of the IILS is to provide the skills and understanding for proper language acquisition based on the pure language idea and the focused approach to learning acquisition. Again, welcome to Living Chronicles.
Kingdom Heard.
You said it, I didn't, okay? Okay, so let's start with, I know that you grew up as a Hebrew Israelite. Unlike me, who knew nothing about Hebrewism until I came into the knowledge of this at 23, 24 years old, you grew up in this life. Tell us what that was like, because you grew up in America, not like the children that were born here grew up here. You grew up in America in that lifestyle. Share a little bit of what that was like.
Okay. First, giving all praises to the Creator again. Thank you for the opportunity. Rachaya. So, I was born in 1950. As a fact, all of my sisters were also, when they, on their birth certificates, they had the name Israel. So I was the oldest, and my name is David, and then Israel, and then we have our slave name, Tate. Right?
Okay, all right.
My father was childhood friends of Ben Ami.
Okay.
And my spiritual father, which became my parent actually, was Nasi Gavri Yah.
Okay.
So they were childhood.
The three of them were childhood
right.
friends.
And they grew up together. They played basketball together. And the whole idea of Hebrew, they were all in that together. Now, my father divorced my mother when I was 5 years old.
Okay.
And he didn't leave me a great inheritance when he made transition a few years ago.
Okay.
But what he did give me was a belief.
Okay.
Belief. And if anything can be said about me that's good, then I give all credit to the brothers and sisters that were also connected to that belief of Hebrew and Israelite, and one day coming to Israel and growing our own food. These were the ideas that were in my mind, put in my mind when I was very young. Mm. So that's how it started off. And growing up, we didn't grow up in a Hebrew community, but my father, when he would come to pick me up, he would take me to a beta and houses of the brothers and sisters back then. I was a little child. I didn't understand anything. All I knew was simply I was a Hebrew.
Okay.
And I'll never forget my first, second year, third year of school.
This was in public school in Chicago?
In public school in Chicago. The teacher would always say, we'd have a new teacher, right? Even a new school, but that's a story in itself. And when they would read the attendance sheet, they would get to my name, and they would say, David Israel, and then I would say here, and they would look at the name, and they would look at me, and they would look at the name, and they would look at me, and they would say, are you Jewish? And I would say, no, I'm Hebrew, So that was my experience, and that stayed with me, that identity, that idea stayed with me. I always knew that I was a Hebrew, and I always presented myself as a Hebrew. Okay?
So growing up, then it wasn't a matter of like dressing any specific way as a Hebrew, or did you have specific chagim? Did you observe the chagim and things like that?
That's an excellent question. So when my mother and father divorced, one request that my father had, that he asked of my mother, was to bring us up as Hebrew. Right. And she respected that.
Hallelujah.
Now, I saw my father maybe once, twice, maybe 3 times a year, but she respected that. So when she would go out shopping and she would buy meat, beef, and she would buy pork. And she would always come back and she'd say, all right, listen, I bought pork, but you have beef also. Now you're a Hebrew, but you make the choice. She would always say,
Okay.
I'll never forget that. She would always say, when she would go to church, she said, we're going to church. You don't have to go, but if you'd like to go, you can come.
Wow.
Now she respected my father, and that other things, the only thing good I remember her saying about my father,
Outside of respecting those,
she would say, that man can make some good lemonade.
that's one of those taking the lemons in life and making lemonade.
I guess
so she figured out a way.
One thing about but that man can make some good lemonade.
Well, she found something good to say.
Right. So that was my
Oh,
experience with Hebrew, and I think we've shared this with you. It's almost like the story of the 2 young fish that had woke up. Well, they decided to take a trip throughout the sea.
Okay.
So they woke up the next morning and they started on their journey, on their trip. And as they were beginning to embark on this journey, one of the elder fish saw them and yelled out, "Hey, how's the water?" After a few hundred meters, one of the young fish turned to the other and said, "What in the world is water?" So this is my consciousness as far as Hebrew. What is a Hebrew?
Okay.
You understand? So again, and even when
You had been immersed in it like the fish were immersed in the water all their lives. You were immersed in being a Hebrew, but then you had to stop and say, what is a Hebrew?
What is a Hebrew? Even with the idea of the kingdom. What is a kingdom? You understand? So sometimes we find ourselves, what is this actually?
Talk to me about that. Did you ever come to the understanding of what is a Hebrew? Did you answer your own question?
In the past, and I've been here since 1976, but we've never had a class on kingdom.
On kingdom.
There's never been a course on the kingdom. And I understand why. But if you ask the average saint what is a kingdom, then they give the most common response was, it's a government of men and women who are governed by God, Yah. Period. That's it. So that was my response. But I'll never forget, this is when I started teaching at colleges and everything, and they would ask me, well, who are you and why are you here? And I told them, we are Hebrew Israelites from the tribe of Judah. You've heard this. This is the normal response, okay? And we are part of the 12 tribes of Israel. And then I would say, we have come to establish the kingdom of God, the kingdom of Yah, kingdom of God, right? And then once one person asked me, well, what is a kingdom? And when I gave the standard definition, they'd ask me, can you go into detail? And I found myself uncomfortable.
And began questioning yourself, looking for more answers.
Absolutely. Because here it is, I've been given a platform in higher education. And I think that one of the things that we all have to come to some type of ponderance over is who we are. What does it mean to be Hebrew? What does it mean to be? We can talk about the Jews, but what about the Hebrews? What does that mean to be a Hebrew? So many of us look at it from a perspective of genealogy and try. Don't let me get too nerdy.
You're not
okay?
getting nerdy. This is interesting. I'm waiting. I want to hear.
All right. So when you look at the etymology of the word Hebrew and the root letters ayin, bet, resh.
Make sure you keep your volume up because this is important.
Ayin, bet, resh, which means to pass. We were taught that Abraham was the first Hebrew from the perspective of genealogy.
Right.
I'm adding that in because there was no discussion about Abraham's the first Hebrew. That's what most people would say.
Right.
But when you look at the genealogy of it and a little bit of etymology of the word, it means to pass from one place to the other. Now, historically so, that was the lifestyle of our forefathers back then. They would migrate from one place to the other with their animals, with their livestock, according to the seasons, right? So if you had land and it was your land, now there were no borders and everything, right? But if you saw someone passing through, you would call them a Hebrew. Okay? But moving from one place to the other, so we understand that. But if we go back to the etymology and the metaphysics of it, then really, and I'm putting this on the table, Adam was the first Hebrew. Moving from a consciousness of, we know the creation story. He was created from the dust of the earth.
Right.
And then it says, and this breath of life in his nostrils, which I'm saying that was a educational process.
Okay.
Because after that dedicational and educational process, on his certificate of completion, it was written, and he became a living soul. What was he before he was a living soul? Just a soul.
Okay.
And when you talk about soul, biblically so, and historically so, and also from the standpoint of etymology, nephesh, it's talking about the inner organs of the body. Heart, the lungs, the kidneys, etc. is considered the soul. And I'll never forget that Abba Gadola gave a presentation on that, and he had charts using a car as an example. And when you look at a car, you have the body of the car.
Yeah, the outer.
And then, but when you open the hood, you see the soul of the car, the motor, the etc., right? So Adam was a soul, but he became a living soul through some type of matriculation of consciousness from one level to a higher level. But the key words right there are purpose and identity. Identity and purpose.
Okay.
He was given identity and purpose.
His identity being?
One of the children of this force that we call Yahweh.
Okay.
And that's a lesson in itself that we're still not really hitting it on the head.
Okay, and his purpose being?
Having dominion over the planet. And when I use the word dominion because of our experience with slavery and discrimination, certain words don't sit well in our consciousness when we hear one dominion over us. Let's not use dominion, so we shy away from it. And then we have some that want to take that whole idea out. But if we believe that we're Hebrew Israelites, then and the story of the Hebrew Israelites are written in what's called the Old Testament and even the New Testament, then that's the source of our ideas. Okay. There are only two ideas, sources of ideas, according to Scripture. Either it's coming from this higher source or power that created everything,
Okay.
or an opposing force. The only two ideas according to that narrative. And when we talk about truth, remember everything, well, the word truth in Hebrew is aleph, tav, aleph,
Mem.
tav, right? Truth, according from a Hebrew perspective, is everything written in those scriptures from aleph through tav.
From the beginning to the end.
That's truth. Didn't say from A to Z. That's a whole nother dynamic. If you take the first letter of any other language and the last letter of any other language, that's a whole nother dynamic. So this particular truth is relevant to the purpose of why Adam was created, why we were created. That goes into a whole lot.
So I think that it definitely warrants a series of discussions.
Yeah. I don't want to give the impression that I know everything, because I don't.
Well, this is just, these are your expressions, your beliefs, your experience.
Yeah, that if anything good can be said about me, it's because of this belief, these beliefs. Now, I've made my mistakes, still making mistakes, right? You were with Nasi Shalig, right? You were here when Nasi Shalig was here. Nasi Shalig do you remember Nasi Shalig ever asking you this question? Baby, do you love the kingdom?
I've heard him say that, yes.
Nasik was saying, now I was an understudy of Nasi Shalig, and at one point he would ask the question, what is the kingdom?
That wasn't picked up.
Really?
Wasn't picked up.
So he would ask that question, what is the kingdom?
What
is the kingdom?
What is the kingdom?
Right. But these weren't things. Nasik didn't give us a lesson on the kingdom, okay? But he would ask us, what is the kingdom, right? He would ask me, do you love the kingdom? And then when we were in his chambers, certain times with him, he would ask, what is the kingdom?
So what was the response?
Not too many. We would do that recital of that standard response.
Right.
Okay. But, and I'm going to say this. It was good for them, because there was a whole nother, I'm going to use this word, and I'll be using this word through the interview.
Okay.
But I want to, when I say spirit, okay, I want everybody to think of three words: will, purpose, and intent.
Will,
purpose and intent. If
Okay.
I say spiritual, I'd like for you just to think will, purpose, and intent.
Okay.
I want to take it out of the mystical, intangible element, even though will is intangible. Purpose is intangible. Intent is intangible. But if you anytime you see someone or hear someone saying spirit and just
leaving it out there,
and just leave it out there, think of will, purpose, and intent. So back then in the Shikun,
in the early days of the Kifar,
in the early days of the Kifar, also the early days of the Kifar, there was another will, purpose, and intent. I think it wasn't coming from the individuals. It was coming from leadership at that time. So whatever they said, because something caused us to connect to this idea of this kingdom that we didn't understand it.
Right.
When I came here, my father brought me here and he left. But when I came, something caused me to stay. I had friends over there, family over there.
You were 17 years old. Life.
Right, and had signed up for going to DeVry Institute of Technology in Chicago. I had finished the ROTC.
Okay.
I don't know why I went through all that, but that's where I was. But I always remember that my father would say one day we would be in Israel and we would grow our own food. And so that was always in the back of my mind. So this spirit was in us, right? So when he came to me, I hope we're not getting off.
No,
When he came to me at 17, I had just graduated from high school. And I went to school down south in Athens, Georgia. That's where my family's. My grandfather, my mother's father had made transition. My grandmother was there at the house alone, so the decision was made by the family to move myself and my first cousin to stay with her. Right. So that's where I went to high. My first year was in Evanston's Township High. Are you from Chicago?
No, I'm not from Chicago.
Okay. So, but after that first year, they moved me down south. So my point is, after I graduated, I went back up to Chicago. I had my license, my mother's car, and I was just blessed, I guess, because all my friends were talking about this girl by the name of Amy. I never forget Amy Davis. I never forget Amy Davis. And I met Amy Davis, right? And Amy Davis liked me and everything. So I never forget, we had set up, I was going to pick her up in the car, and we was just going to go riding around, right? So talking to her on the phone and making plans. And my mother comes to me and said, "Your father's downstairs." And I was a little surprised, right? Because we didn't have cell phones back then. I was on the phone.
You had a landline.
Right. So I said, "Amy, I'll call you right back. I'll call you right back. Okay, we'll finish that. I'll call you right back." And I went downstairs, and my father looked at me and he said, "Are you ready to go to Israel?" And I looked at him and I said, "Ken."
But you didn't realize it was going to be at that moment?
No. First he wanted that answer first. I said, "Ken." And then he said, "So we're going tonight."
Wow.
Go upstairs, just get you a jacket, just one change of clothes, and I have everything else for you. I have a suitcase full of clothes and everything. And I said, "Okay."
Did you call Amy back?
Listen, just the power of the idea. It was like that idea took over me. I didn't call Amy back. And he told me before I went back upstairs, he said, "You can't tell anyone."
So your Ema didn't even know?
She didn't know. I went upstairs. I put some things in a bag. I went upstairs. I put some things in a bag. And I said, "Mom, I'm going with my father. I'll be back."
But you knew you weren't going to be back.
I didn't know anything. The whole thing was this idea that I'm going to Israel, that I was always told that we would have to go back to Israel. So I was obedient.
You didn't know that you were going and staying. You didn't know if you were just going for a visit.
I didn't know those
anything.
ideas didn't come into my mind.
Right.
I'm going to Israel. We knew that I was brought in the idea that America was not our home, right? Never forget when I was a child, Ayla and Ayla, I'm the oldest, Ayla is right under me. She may not remember this, but we stayed on the south side then. We made up a language. And it went like this. And she would say something, I would say, and we say, and I'll never forget, we rode on the plane sometimes to Atlanta from Chicago, just to
mess with folks.
I don't know if it was messing with folks. We just turned to each other. We didn't know what we were saying, but maybe it was these are the seeds of Hebrew, the Hebrew language,
or just knowing that you were going to be speaking another language at some point.
So we went to the Nation House at that time. Yeah, a few hours later, we were on a plane coming to Israel. It happened just like that.
Wow.
And you know what? I guess I don't know if it was excitement or astonishment. I don't know. I just remember we're going to Israel.
And you have been raised all your life on that. So
that
this
we're going to Israel. Israel is our
the
land.
fulfillment of
Right. You know. So yeah, so that's how I came. And like I said, he was here 3 months. And there was a situation that happened between him and I, and because I'd never I'm not the type of brother that would raise up on my parents, whatever they said, you know.
Right.
Naturally, I'd get an attitude a little bit, but I wouldn't express that attitude.
Well, I mean, back in those days, teenagers didn't do that.
Listen, it was,
you swallowed it.
Right. That was the season. That was the time of I brought you into this world.
I will take you out.
We had gotten here. And I'll never forget, we first went to a ride, right? And this is a story in itself. But my name is David. It's a birth certificate, David. They took us to a ride. And that evening, all the Nissikim came up to a ride.
It was for something special?
My father was childhood friends of Abba Gadol, Nasi Gavri. His name is Nasi Gavriel at that time.
Right.
And they came up with others. Right. So, and they remember me. So I was in the back, and sometimes my father would come back for certain things because my father always liked to buy things and little gifts. That's his legacy. He would buy things and always bring in shoes or whatever and just give it to saints and everything. So he went to the suitcase. I was in the back, and then I don't know where I went, but I heard my name called, David. So I came out of one door, and he came out the other door, and they said, and we're talking to one of your Abba, and everything. And I went back, and then he went back, and they called again, David. And I came out, and then he came out, and that's when my Abba, Nasi Gabriel, said, okay, this is going to be a situation. He said, your name is David, your father's name is David. We'll call you Ben David. So that's where that Ben David came from.
Okay, so that's where the name came from,
Right.
Ben David. Okay.
Right. But my name, and when my father made transition just a few years ago,
Took your
my
name.
name David. And
Okay.
that's going to be a challenge for most people that are
Know
me,
you all
right?
your-
Ben David,
Yeah.
Ben David.
Toda Rabah. Wow. Wow. So let me ask you this. With coming here at 17, being raised your whole life with a sense of Hebrew Israelite, did you find that when you got here, the other people in your age bracket had the same type of understanding, or was their understanding somewhere else?
You know, I have to admit, I don't think anyone thought about that. There was another will, purpose, and
Okay.
that encapsulated everything that we did.
Okay.
And there was joy in that will, purpose, and intent. There was a camaraderie in that will, purpose, and intent. To be able to go to your friend's house and eat just like a part of the family, having big brothers and big sisters and people genuinely looking out for you, taking you in as family. We didn't think about, and when they said this is the kingdom, we just, hey, this is the king. Is this the king? This is, and it was spiritually fulfilling. At least to me it was.
Right.
It was spiritually fulfilling to the point where I did not miss that life in America. I missed Amy. I missed Amy.
If Amy ever sees this.
I definitely missed Amy and everything, but
Did you ever talk with your imam? How did you close that out?
well, this is what happened. So my father and I got into it. You remember the baseball games in the lot right across from
across.
So, and those games were played on
Yom Shishi,
right?
Yeah. And that was a big highlight.
Right. So we stayed with his name. He was a minister at that time, Minister Koliah, and
Okay.
Nathan.
Okay.
It was in that area further down. There were some buildings right down the street here. That's where we stayed. That's where our
Okay.
So there were brothers. There was brother Yehuda. Remember Tua Yehuda, the basketball player.
Uh,
He
him,
stayed
yes.
there. Kareem, El Kareem stayed
okay.
there. I was there. My father was there. Ben Kolive was a little bitty boy. And Levy. They were little boys.
Sar Levy?
Right.
Okay.
They were little bitty boys. And
Okay.
then, I don't know if you remember Amalia's sister, Rachel,
I remember.
and her husband, Aman.
Yep.
We all stayed in that place.
Okay.
So we were coming from the game to the house, and my father said, I need to tell you something. And naturally so, just waiting for him. And he said that he had questions about certain things, okay? And it just in this past season, I understood what he was saying. I didn't understand.
You didn't understand then.
And when I looked at him, and I said, and I got upset. And this is the first time I ever raised my voice. I said, what do you mean you have questions? You've brought me all the way here from my family, this and that. What do you mean you have questions? And he didn't say anything. He just, and maybe I jumped the gun. Maybe I should have shut my mouth and just listened to what he said. Mm-hmm. But I didn't. But that's what popped into my mind, mm-hmm. right? It might not have been that, but that's how it started off. And then he said something else. He said, you have more brothers and sisters. And I was shocked because I thought that
it was just you and
Ayla, and I have another sister, two more sisters, but from my father, myself, Ayla, and Deborah, mm-hmm. right? And I was shocked. And then I said, but am I the oldest? That's the only thing that comes. Am I the oldest? Right, am I the big brother? Am I the oldest? Do I have bigger brothers and everything? He said, you're the oldest. And it was just too much for me. 17, just right. Too much for me. And I said, and I walked away from my father. This is a shishi. I walked away from him. And I went to the house. We had dinner. Everybody's saying, where's your father? And I said, he might probably be in the shikun mm-hmm. at that time. Motzai Shabbat came. Where's your father? Go to the shikun, just check on your father mm-hmm. and everything. Went to the shikun. No one had seen my father. Yom Rishon came. No, Motzai Shabbat that night, security had gotten brothers together and started looking all around Dimona.
For your Abba?
For my father. And he disappeared. And I'm thinking, where could he be? Where's my father? Where's my father and everything? And I'm starting to think now, did he get lost in the mountains or somewhere?
Did something happen?
3 months went by. No one knew where my father was.
For 3 months.
And it bothered me, but I was comforted with the will, purpose, intent spirit of the saints. Mm-hmm. There was a comforting thing. And on that, I remember it was 3 months because I never forget my Abba, Nasi Gavriya. He saw me, and he has that smile, right?
Right.
So he saw me, he said, hey, Ben David. And he said that smile on me, and he said, well, he put his arm around me and he said, we know where your father is. Your father went back to Babylon. And he was smiling and everything. Uh-huh. He said, but don't worry about it because I'm your Abba now. And that's how that started.
Wow.
And he was a parent. My father was mine. He fathered me, but Nasi Gavriya was mine.
He parented you.
He was a hard. He wasn't easy. I mean, sometimes I would say, I'm not your fleshly brother. You gonna beat me too? Hey, where's the, But, yeah. But and like I said, if there's anything good that can be said about me, it's because of this kingdom. But again, maybe because of the good experience and everything wasn't good. I'm not saying that things was good, but it was something in me that said this was a kingdom, at this stage of its development, and things aren't
Always going to be like this.
always going to be roses.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that I connected to that. Something inside of me just connected to me. There were times when I was hungry. My father had, Abba Nasi Gavriya had other children, everybody. Right. So I knew inside of me that I couldn't, when they would get this pock of honey, right? I think it's every month or something like that. I wasn't one of the ones that was expecting, well, because you call me your son, you know. I gave respect to Gabriel and Yoav and Avraham and Yesha and Nisi. You know, those are the ones that were there.
Right.
So, and if I got some, hallelujah. If I didn't, hallelujah. When during New World Passover, they would go out and buy bod and everything. I did not expect them to buy bod from me. And the times that they didn't, because I understood that. I was 17, then I was going into 18, so I need to get out here and work. So that was in my mind. Some might take that as bad experiences. If he called you your father, then he's supposed to buy you this and he's supposed to take care of you and everything. I didn't look at it like that. I look at it that the blessing is I'm here. If I can work, I'll work. That's how I looked at it.
So you weren't expecting anything from anyone?
Not anything, nothing, because something inside made me understand that this is something that we're building this. And if it feels like this now in the kfar, in the shikun, wow, what will be? Remember, we didn't have citizenship.
Right, nobody had status now.
Right? So we couldn't just jump on a bus like that and just go, even though we jumped on buses and wood and everything. I mean, to me, this was like, you know, I don't know, maybe my life was different, but I was bored in Chicago. I didn't get off in it. I wasn't one of those, you know, I played basketball. That's what I wanted
about
to do, just
it.
basketball. I wasn't bored. I mean, I was bored. It seemed boring. Coming to Israel, all of a sudden, this was like one of those TV adventures. You know, those Disney adventures and everything. That was in my mind. This was home.
So what were some of the things that you did once you got here that made it that Disney adventure, that made it exciting? Just being here was enough. Just being in the Shikun and the Shishi basketball games and having the family experience, that was enough for you.
To me, that was
everything.
It was family. And I mean, and it was really family. Now, we had the bad members of those members that really didn't understand, that wasn't connected like that. We understood that because that's in every family and everything. But bottom line, we were all family. You know, I was the oldest, you know, with that group. Gabriel, I'm older than Gabriel and everything. But I was the oldest and everything. And there was a respect there. But there were other children that sometimes would challenge that and everything. In other words, it wasn't all roses. There was struggles, and there were times when, like I said, I was hungry, but I didn't look at it like I didn't starve. There wasn't no starving, except for the Bolga season and the second generation. When I say the Bolga and crack wheat, they know what I'm talking about and everything during that time. But besides that,
y'all ate a lot of Bolga and crack wheat. I take it.
We would. It was in everything. I mean, the sisters got so, I don't know, Bolga loaf, Bolga patties, just Bolga. And one thing about it, you know, the children had to pick the Bolga and everything. Sometimes we weren't picking it right. So you take that spoonful of Bolga and then you get the rock. Again, I didn't take it as, well, we're poor, we're suffering.
Right.
I didn't look at that.
It was just all part of the process,
the dynamic,
part of the life.
At that point in our development. And we were always given that idea that this is going to get just better and better and better. So that was, maybe I was just too gullible, because I ate it all. And I think that kind of protected me because I'll never forget. Now there was 3 months, right? I hadn't talked to my mother, and I'll never forget.
So for 3 months you had not talked to your Ima, and for 3 months you did not know where your Abba was.
But again, that loneliness, I didn't feel it. I'll never forget that this was around the 2.5 months period, right, when my father had disappeared, and I wasn't in contact with my family, my biological family. And I'll never forget, I was walking from the Shikun to that place where we said the building is right down there, and I saw it was a Yom Shishi, and I saw a brother and a sister with their children walking around and everything, and the children were, I mean, that image, I think it kind of, something hit me that, wow, you here, you don't have a father and a mother, you don't have, and I'll never forget when I got back to the house. Do you remember Timara? She's still here.
Married to...
She's not married. She was married to Ali. She remembers this. We had a merpeset, a porch area, right? And that's where only thing I had was just a shelf. Everybody had a shelf.
Right, everybody had one shelf. That's all we had.
And I'll never forget, I don't know, that image was in my mind and I couldn't get it out of my mind, and I broke down. I broke down to the point that I'd never lost control of myself. I mean, I was distraught. And she heard me, right? And she's saying, Benavida, you okay? You okay? And she wanted to come in, and I wouldn't let her in. I put my foot there, and I just had to let it out. And I'll never forget that those merpeses, they had a window there, right? And something inside of me was saying, jump out the window, jump out the window, jump. And I was fighting it and crying and yelling, and she was trying to get in the, like, you okay, okay? And I don't know how long it did, but at one point I got control of it, and then I was able to calm down. I had tore that porch.
Oh my
goodness. It was like, almost like I was possessed when I think about it. I was just start throwing everything around and everything. And, but then I don't know, it was a calmness came, and she came in and she grabbed me. I'll never forget it. I love that. I love these women, these people. I love these brothers and sisters. But she came to me and she grabbed me and said, you're going to be all right. That night at 3 o'clock in the morning, I had to go to the bathroom. I went to the bathroom. I sat in there because that was my quiet place. I'm not one of those mystical guys, brothers, right? The 2 times in my life that this has happened, this was the first time. I don't know whose voice it was. But that voice said, you won't be alone.
You won't be alone.
2 weeks later, no, this was about a year or something later, I heard that Allah was in the kingdom. So, wow, you got me going now. Let's take a...
We see each other in passing, but we really don't know anybody's story.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't expect all of this.
Obviously, but it's okay.
Yeah, but, I don't even know if we're going to by script now.
I'm going to leave it where it is because it's just the flow. It's a flow, you know.
So, yeah.
And when I'm allowing you to share whatever you want to share, and when you exhaust that particular time, then we'll move to the next question.
Yeah, so let's move to the next.
Dreams is irritating me. Oh, wow. All right. So the next question is going to be, you can talk to me now about the School of the Prophets and, you know, the hermeneutic studies, the New World Chronicles, obviously all of that.
Okay. So I went through, I graduated from the Kingdom School in Holiness.
So you did, even though you had graduated from high school in America, you came here and you did what, like a senior year Kingdom School?
It was like a senior year.
That's what I did.
Right. Graduated from the Kingdom School in Holiness, and naturally, the trend then was you graduate. We called it coming out back then.
Right, coming out.
And you get married, right? So, graduated, and in the interim of this, Nasi Shalik had started to gravitate. I'm going to use the word gravitate because when he would see me, he would say, "Ben Navid, Bo." Well, sometimes I would get a message, Abba Shalik, Nasi Shalik wants you and everything, and he would tell me to go to the Americas and buy some tomatoes or something like that, you know. So that was the beginning of the relationship, right? So it graduated, and then Uri was the ice cream maker at that
Yes,
time.
he was. Down the stairs in the bottom.
Right. So Uri was and I wanted to learn how to make ice cream, but after Uri was Eliasaph.
I remember Eliasaph. I remember Uri.
Yeah, it was Eliasaph. Eliasaph, and I gravitated to Eliasaph because the brother's an intellect.
Yes.
I mean, we would talk about books and things like that, and I liked Eliasaph.
It appeared to the nerd in you.
Yeah, it appeared to that nerd in me, right? And yeah, so sometimes she and stuff like that. I would go to his house and stuff like that, and we sit out, and he'd be talking about books.
Mm-hmm.
And we played basketball together also. That was another thing, that was another something we had in common and everything. But Eliasaph was my guy. He was like my big brother.
Wow.
My guy. And so he made ice cream. So I wanted to make ice cream. So I started making ice cream and everything. That's how I get a little money.
Right.
And at that point, when we found out where my father was, he started sending incense for me to sell. And I was the first brother to go house to house knocking on doors selling incense.
To Israelis.
To the Israelis and everything. I didn't go stand on corners or anything.
Right.
I just went knocking on the door in the little Hebrew that So yeah, that was that. I don't know if it was the ice cream or it was me, but when I started making the ice cream, Nasik was calling me more to bring him,
Of course. See, I stopped buying ice cream in the Shikun because twice it happened to me. It took forever, and the line would be all the way up the stairs. and then Sheshes Ray is sending down for 13 servings.
Yeah.
Nasi Garogadol sent for 8 servings. And everybody would be mad, but we had nothing when we could do about it. I'd be like the third person from the machine getting ready, and they would run out. Happen, and you had been in line from maybe 8 o'clock at night to 1 o'clock in the morning twice. I was like, I ain't eating ice cream. I'm finished.
You weren't the only ones, but I guess the other sisters that would come, they would pull me to the side and they say, Ben Avid, listen, when you make ice cream, call me and let me know.
Right.
Or get in contact with me. It wasn't a calling. But,
right, with no cell.
And that's what I did. So there was sisters that they had a little inside
right,
pool.
They had a little hookup.
Right.
I didn't have a hookup, so I just stopped eating ice cream. I was like, bump it ain't worth it.
So with School of the Prophets, so then when I graduated, the brothers were coming in. I didn't know what School of the Prophets was like that, but I knew I wanted to get into some type of School of the Prophets platform thing. So the brothers would come in from Arad and Mitzpeh back then, if you remember that. Mm-hmm. And, right, I remember that. So anyhow, they were coming down and everything. And saw Adiv started a junior School of the Prophets.
Okay.
Right? This is when we were still in Kingdom School in Holiness. So the idea was planted.
Right.
Right? School of the Prophets. And these were amazing brothers. And there was a brother here by the name of Shamor.
I lived in his house.
You lived there?
I lived upstairs. They were in 22 up?
Right.
I lived there.
How long did you live there?
I moved in. I came in 79. I got married in 80. Yeah. Until we moved to the Kidfar.
Really?
Yeah. Yep. It was Ima Tehila. Nasi Gelkanan was always out on assignment.
Right.
It was Shamor and Ima and them and Atra Diba.
Right.
And then Abir and Her name was Kabir, and her name was Miriam at that time.
All right.
They lived They lived on the Maripesset.
Right. Yep. Right. Okay.
Wow. Shamari had taught me how to make bread.
Wow.
When he was a child, he taught me how to make bread.
So we that was the taste of it during that senior year in school, Kingdom School in Holiness. Maybe also Shamor, he had chosen myself. You remember Ben Kai?
Yeah, Ben Kai. Yeah, he still lives here in Ashkelon.
Right.
Yeah, he teaches English. He still lives up in Ashkelon.
Okay, I haven't seen him.
I've seen him.
Back then, we were Gabriel, myself, and Ben Kai and myself. Yeah. So anyhow, so I had gotten, we said the graduation, the coming out, that's what we called it back then. Yeah. And then you get married. And there's a reason why I know your question. How did I hook up to it? Now, this might sound strange, but it was in me. But my whole thing was, I need to get married, and I need to get married. And there weren't many in my age bracket.
Really?
No, there weren't. And all the new sisters that came in, they were cooking up to the Matzaels and all them.
Or either they came in there or like somebody on the international staff.
On the international staff and everything. So we were the brothers that, man, they taking off. So naturally, Viva and I, and that's a story in itself. But Viva and I hooked up and everything. And so then it was the marriage thing.
Okay, so School of the Prophets.
School of the Prophets. First of all, it was, I think that was one of the greatest blessings.
Keep your volume up.
Okay, I think that was one of the greatest blessings that I was given, coming to Israel. Mm-hmm. But then the School of the Prophets, it helped give me a foundation that I gravitated to. Again, if anything good can be said about me, it gets credit also. All of you get credit, but everybody.
Definitely, that's a big part of who you are.
And the connection and relationship that developed out of that, all that was School of the Prophets. I'll never forget that. I was diligent. I was diligent. I was very studious, looking for information, wanting information. I would in Mitzpeh Ramon, one of the jobs that we had was gardening.
Gardening?
Right.
Oh, okay.
For the
like a communal garden?
No, municipality, going around and cleaning up the different greenery there, etc. Sweeping the streets and everything. And that was the time that I would study and go over School of the Prophets work.
While you were supposed to be working?
While I was supposed to be working.
So you were somewhere hiding.
Well, yeah. I mean, you go walk out when everybody has a report in at the place, right?
Right.
And I never forget the manager of us was named Mordecai, and he always reminded me of one of those little elves. That's how he looked, and that's how he walked, like one of those little elves and everything. And at first he didn't like me. But at the end of it, he was inviting me to his house, and he would say,
"What did you do to him?"
I don't know. But he started to, we would get into conversations, and he was just interested, and to the point that it was getting annoying because I knew that he would be coming looking for me, so I could not hide and stuff like that. But then I told him, listen, I'm studying. I'm in university. I'm studying because School of the Prophets was university level, right? And he would say, so what are you studying? He started to get interested in the community and everything, and we became good friends.
Wow.
At one point he was complaining, because he's the manager and you're supposed to be working. One time it got to a point where he would just give me an assignment to do. You need to clean this area, sweep these streets, and then if you want to, you can sit down and you can study. Okay. And that's the relationship we had established.
And he probably respected the fact that you were studying and that you were pursuing something at a higher level.
Hopefully, but it worked. Right, it worked and everything. So yeah, so going down and sitting with the brothers and Nasi Shalig and that spirit, and it just opened that desire to want to know more and more and more. So there were certain brothers that I just automatically gravitated to. So it was the Nasi Shalig. I never missed a presentation by Abba Gadol.
Okay.
Never. There were others, Prince Asiel, even though
He would come and go.
he would
be
come
like a
and
guest
go,
speaker.
but naturally, so I would be there. There weren't a lot. There weren't that many.
Right.
There was a brother by the name of Ben Ami. That's Aviel's. He was one of my first mentors. It was him, and it was brother. Remember Yosef? Yosef. He was always on international staff.
Brother.
Yeah.
I think vaguely.
He was one of my first. These were the big brothers that taught me. I'm not just saying you don't put your hand in fire. I'm talking about the more in depth detail of things about kingdom and life and everything. Him, Ben Ami, Yosef. Benzion was I looked at him as a brother that I can go to and listen, and they imparted wisdom and understanding, and I was drawn to that, right? And then I liked their deliverance also. These are brothers that they were articulate, they knew how to use words and everything. And I like that, right? Now, all the brothers have their portion and everything. All the brothers are wise and full of understanding. You okay?
I'm going to edit that out.
You can learn something from everybody, believe me.
You can. You absolutely can.
And that's one thing that they told me, that sometimes even your enemies become your best teachers. And that's what stuck with me even up to this day. Those that don't like you, you can learn something from it.
Even if it's just to learn what not to do,
what not
to be like them.
Right. So so this is School of the Prophets. The studies were on point, and something
learning. It feeds, it nourishes your soul.
Absolutely, which caused me to. I don't know if you've heard this before, but when you teach, you cannot feed the mind and starve the soul. They fed the soul.
Fed your soul.
If you're going to teach, you just can't give information. You have to feed the soul.
Right.
Now, there's a word for that, feeding the soul, and it's called edification.
Okay, edification.
Right.
All right.
And this is something that some more things that need to be added to the School of the Prophets curriculum and teachers and everything. You just can't get up and give a presentation. And this is the formula that I've used, and it allowed me to take the School of the Prophets document and matriculate from teaching in the grammar school to junior high school, to high school, to colleges and universities and lectures. That whole idea of you give the information, but you have to balance it out with something that when that touches the souls of the people, even our not so warm spirited, fair-skinned brothers and sisters and everything, they would love. When Dr. David Israel is my lecturer, it was like they would call me they would cause problems. All this is School of the Prophets now. Okay, you learn all this from the School of the Prophets. I know it sounds strange, but Nasik Shaliach had put together a curriculum that we studied everything. So when the saints ask me sometimes, so what do you teach at universities? And I tell them, well, I teach law, business administration, I teach education. There's a health program that I'm teaching now, this and that and other. And they would say, where did you learn all that? And I said, from the School of the Prophets, because that's what Nasi gave us. That was the curriculum then, So naturally you were dedicated. It was a thirst, a burning thirst. I got to get to this. I don't miss School of the Prophets. And I didn't miss coming from Mitzpeh for years. back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Twice a week.
Right. So I'll never forget, I'm going to share this, not going to mention any name, but I was one of the ones chosen to, you remember Brother Avner?
Yeah, I remember Avner, yeah.
Okay. I love Avner. I understand everybody has, I love Avner,
Right.
you know. He's definitely a colleague, right? But so we were ones that were chosen to graduate the 1983 class.
Okay.
And there was a sister called Yeshiva.
Yeshiva?
Right.
Loved
Remember
her.
Cause
Loved her.
Yeshiva and who else was it? There was one more. But so we had to give presentations. And there was some opposition of me giving presentations that came up, right? And it was strong opposition. To the point where when they were organizing, you know, you have to organize. They had a particular brother organizing
Right.
everything, and he wouldn't call me and let me know the day and the time and everything. And yeah, so there was opposition. So the day of our graduation, I got a standing ovation.
The one they didn't want to speak.
And then he never came up. But
Right.
to this day, you know, every time, you know, there might be something else to it, but that's
New World Chronicles and hermeneutics.
excellent. So many people may not know this, but when you study history, there's a criteria that it has to meet. So any information that you come up with, any dates, any facts, have to be written in the past, and you just reference it. If let's say the story of why the Bible isn't considered a hit, because there was no one that back then that wrote and recorded the events that took place in the Garden of. So there's nothing written there. So that's not considered a history book or history, right? So, but if you go back, European, since the onslaught of the Europeans and everything is recorded from them conquering the conquerors and those that were conquered.
Except what's not recorded is all the destruction, all the things that they destroyed that came prior to them.
Right.
So they could substantiate themselves.
Right. So that's history. A lot of people don't know. So if there's not evidence, recorded evidence, whether it's through archaeology or any artifacts or something like that, then they don't accept that.
Okay.
That's why Bible is not accepted as a history book. However, that was the power that the Europeans had when you talk about history and everything. They had the power to define. It was them that said it's going to be thus, 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 and thus. But then you have to remember, we had that power to define. Adam had that power to define. That's the whole idea of naming the animals and everything. So Adam had the legal authority, lost the legal authority. It was passed on to the ancient Gentile world power structure at that time, then transferred to the modern European American power structure. So they define what is what. So they define what a Hebrew is, what a Jew is, whatever. They define love. They define family. They define those standards and everything. So New World Chronicles deals with scripture, Bible, as history. That's the basic difference there. We believe that those writings are history.
Okay.
And this is important if you're talking about the kingdom ideology, that it's history. What they said is history. All right. The challenge is the colonization of the Bible. That's the challenge. If what they translated is accurate to the Hebrew, that's the great challenge right here. You know, and that's one of the things that I'm doing today. But we could talk about that. So that's the difference between history and New World.
Okay.
History, your reference has to be recorded from writings or archaeological finds. New World Chronicles is based on Bible.
Okay.
As that as a history.
Okay. And hermeneutics?
Hermeneutics is a Greek term which simply means interpretation.
Okay.
Now the idea came from Nasi Shalia. Again, this is something interesting because we're having a struggle with that today. There's always, if there's not ascension, there's not progress. And I'm using words that have to be defined also. Right? Because the Euro-Gentile world power structure is a progress. To have a car, to have a mobile phone, they consider that
But progressing to what?
That's the point. And that's what we have to ask ourselves. Even when you're talking about leadership, leading to what? Can that be defined? Can you give us some tangible benchmarks as to if we've hit this, hit that, hit this, hit that?
Goes back to that will, purpose, and intent you talked about.
Will, purpose, and intent. There are two, and you've heard this before, there are two dates that are the most important dates in a person's life. Their birth and the day that they understand why they were birthed.
Never heard that before, but it makes sense.
But when we're talking about kingdom ideology right now, which is not taught. Mm-hmm. So where did we come from? I didn't come from Chicago. I didn't come from Chicago. You didn't come from where were you born?
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
That's not where you came from. We didn't come from America. We came from a place called heaven.
Okay.
But to take the myth and religion out of heaven, if you look at the etymology of the word in Hebrew, it's simply a place where Yah is. Or where Yah is. Be with me now. Yah is there. Where Yah is there, that's Sham Yah. And then it has the plural, Hebrew plural with the Yud Mem Sophi. That's heaven. That's heaven. Now we're going into metaphysics right now.
There is a definite need for our children from middle school through high school to have access to these teachings.
Purpose, that's the thing about it. But then if you ask them again, well, what's the purpose? We're not hitting it. This is another. I don't think the majority, we don't know what our purpose is. So you hear, and maybe you can do social experiment. What is our purpose? What is your purpose? What is our purpose? What is this purpose? Some might say to worship Yah.
And then my question would be, how do you do that? How is that manifested in a day-to-day? How do you do that?
I'm gonna show you something.
Okay, so we did hermeneutics.
Right. Hermeneutics again is interpretation. Okay. Just deals with interpretation. That's what it is. Interpret.